pretty correct expediently. There we go. So one relevance to economic history is that's what that speech was all about. That speech was all about long-run stuff, which is what we study in economic history. It was all about economic growth and development, which is what we study in economic history. It was about the world, as he said, from Seneca Falls to Stonewall to Selma, the changes that we have experienced and the work that we do to incorporate everyone into the story of America. All of that is part of what we'll talk about in this course. So it was a great preview of what we do in economic history. Another way of looking at the relevance of economic history comes from the article by Barry Eichengreen, which is in your reader, article number 1. So probably you didn't know that you needed to read articles 1 and 2 before you came today, since they were the articles assigned for today, but now you do. So usually in the reader, when you look at the syllabus and it shows you, for instance, for today, the 2 reader articles, for next Tuesday, the article by Wishart, you want to have read those articles before you come to lecture, because we'll talk about them in class, and I'll talk about them from the perspective, or from the assumption that you've already read through the article at least once. So briefly, Barry Eichengreen is one of my colleagues, and the article in the reader that's by Barry Eichengreen was his presidential address at the Economic History Association a year ago, September. And in the article, as you'll see when you read it in more depth, Eichengreen is talking about how the crisis that began in 2007 was a fabulous time for economic historians. It was our 15 minutes of fame. I had never had so many phone calls from so many media outlets for so many interviews as I had, starting with the downturn, particularly with the crash in 2008. And they were calling Professor Eichengreen, they were calling me, they were calling Professor Romer, who was then going off to Washington. So she left for Washington in December. So before she left for Washington, and Professor DeLong, the 4 of us being economic historians here in the Department of Berkeley, because they felt that we as economic historians had insight into what was going on in 2008 that our colleagues who were ignorant of history did not. And so what Barry Eichengreen talks about in his article in the reader is the role of economic history as one of the types of reasoning that people can use in trying to understand events and in trying to devise effective economic policy. This course, Rachel said this, and I think she's right, this course is really, in many ways, a public policy course. It's really about what are the problems that we face and what kinds of policies can we devise to address those problems, and what do we learn from history in that process. And so what Barry Eichengreen said in his article is that traditionally, when we talk about reasoning in courses like this, we talk about deductive or inductive reasoning. So deductive reasoning is when we teach you a model, and then we take and we apply that model to certain situations. So you've learned the model, you know what the assumptions are of the model, and now we're going to illustrate it with a few examples. So that would be deductive reasoning. You start from the model, and then you plop it down on top of various events. Inductive reasoning, you start from the events, from the facts. This is what happened, this is what didn't happen, this is how that happened, or at least it's how we think it happened. And you start from the events, and from that you derive a model, or a story, or a theory that helps to explain what we've lived through. So deductive, you go from the model and plop it down on top of the facts. Inductive reasoning, you start from the event, from the facts, and from that you build up or devise an economic story, which we call models. And what Barry Eichengreen referred to in his presidential address was the role of history, which is analogical reasoning. A word that I admit he stumbled on almost every time he said it in his presidential address. Analogical reasoning, or analogical reasoning. Reasoning by analogy. So the reason that the economic historians in the economics department here were so popular when the economy was going to hell and back in 2008 was because we knew the historical analogies. We knew about the Great Depression. We knew about the Panic of 1907. And we could talk about how to understand what the economy was going through in 2008 from the perspective of what the economy had gone through in 1929, or what the economy had gone through in 1907, and which pieces of that were similar, which pieces were different, and where the differences mattered or where they didn't matter. So a second reason we do economic history is not just to understand the president's inaugural speech yesterday, but a second reason we do economic history is because it gives us another form of reasoning, another way of understanding the world we live in, current events, and the policies that we may want to devise to address contemporary economic problems. So, here's a question for you. I'm going to ask you to think about, don't raise your hands, I want you to think about for a second, some current, I want you to help me make a list of some current, by current I mean post-1980, because it's economic history, so current doesn't mean the last 3 weeks, it means over your lifetime. So some current, plus, I guess that would make you 33. Anyway, some current events, I'm thinking primarily US, but I suppose we don't have to restrict it to that, some current events that might be better understood with history. So I want you to take just a second and jot down a couple of ideas, and then I'm going to put you in groups, and have you come up in your group with a list of 3. So why don't you come up with, jot down some ideas while I figure out how I'm going to do these groups. All right. So you missed the announcement that there's no laptops in class. Okay, so you heard the announcement. You missed the announcement. So there's this wedge. You're going to form groups across your row. So this row's a group, that row's a group, that row's a group. Okay. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have groups of 3, and they're going to be by row. So person 1, 2, and 3, you guys are a group. And then here, 1, 2, and 3, you all are a group. And then here, do it that way, right? 1, 2, and 3, you all are a group. And then I got 4 more, so you're going to do groups of 4. The goal in your group is to come up with 3 things that you all agree on that you would put on this list. 3. And then again over here on the wedge, each row is a group. So groups of 4. right. Oops.
Hello.
I just frightened the people who are listening to this a week from now on screencast because I just right into the microphone, so they just jumped off their computer. All right, so let's see what I can put on. I actually have to stand behind. What I don't like about this thing is I have to stand back here all the time, but we'll do it anyway. So who wants to raise their hand? Give me one thing off of your list. Make sure you tell me your name, unless you don't want me to say your name out loud. Daniel. Okay, so whoopsie. Let's go back. Turn this into a pen. So the Southeast Asian, the currency crisis? Yes. All right. So Southeast Asian currency crisis. Certainly by studying other currency crises, we get some insight. Next spring, for those of you who will still be here, we hope to offer Econ 115, which is what is it called? I think it's called World Economic History of the 20th Century, or Economic History of the World of the 20th Century, or get World 20th Century Economic History all in one sentence. And so that's supposed to be offered next spring, and is a place where I'll betcha they're definitely going to talk about that. Okay, somebody else give me one. What's your name? Amol. The dot-com bubble and burst. Good. So looking at bubbles and bursts of bubbles and that kind of thing, certainly having historical insight gives us some insight into the dot-com bubble and then the burst. Here in the orange. Catherine. What did you say before EU? The formation of the European Union. Good. So looking at trade unions, and also just to expand that a little bit, looking at currency unions. So why did the United States find it important to have a national currency? So we developed a national currency in the 1860s. We did not have a national currency before the 1860s. Why not? And what difference did it make to development? Somebody else, over on the side. Yep. What's your name? Sam. Okay. Fall of the Soviet Union. So we can look at issues of defense policy, for instance, and military spending and how that factors into the government spending generally. But we can also look at, in that sense, we can also look at the importance of property rights. Because one of the things that we'll find, alas, one of the things I have to skip over a bit because I'm skipping the colonial section, is the importance of property rights in understanding economic development. And certainly that's a key piece in looking at the Soviet Union versus other economies. Patrick. Okay, so welfare policy changes. In particular, the change from AFDC to TANF, but looking at welfare policy from a grand perspective. So for instance, a lot of people think that welfare policy didn't exist before the New Deal of the 1930s. That's incorrect. We had welfare policies. We're going to study a paper by Joan Hannon about poor relief in the 1820s. The difference between before and after the New Deal was whether that welfare policy was a federal welfare policy or whether it was a state and local welfare policy. What else? Another few. Straight back. Good. Saving and loan crisis in the 1980s. So savings and loan crisis in the 1980s or the financial crisis of 2007. Those were not the first time we'd had financial crises. By studying history, we can see what are the factors that had led to financial crises in earlier times, what were the effects of those things, and what are the differences and the similarities between the 1980s and earlier periods. Alex? Yes. Alex. Okay, so the 2007 to 9 recession and the 2009 to XX recovery. Okay, so looking at both the crisis and the downturn 2007-2009, but also the slow pace of recovery. Can we learn anything, for instance, from looking at the recovery from the Great Depression? Certainly yes, and we're going to spend some time looking at a couple of papers that talk about the recovery from the Great Depression and try to learn some things from that for our understanding of the pace of recovery today. We'll also look at some papers on the rise of services, which I think has a lot to do with also the slow pace of recovery today. In the blue and then in the hat. First in the blue. What's your name? Ethan. Increasing global trade? Good. So we can look at the ways in which the United States economy is now a much more open economy than it used to be, and what are the patterns of protectionism, for instance, that have taken place over the last 200 or 300 years in this economy, and how has that impacted trade? And then in front of Ethan is Ivan. 9/11. Occurrence or effect? Both. So effect is easier for us to look at than occurrence, at least from the perspective of studying U.S. economic history, and looking at the impact, for instance, of both of disasters generally, and also of war-related effects. Right here in this scarf. Sure. Outsourcing. Good. So we can look at the pattern of outsourcing, of activities that used to take place in the United States, now taking place in other countries, and put that into a historical context and see, does that pattern of changing the location of activity, can we think about that from a historical perspective and think about it perhaps a little bit differently? Let me take two more. Oh my gosh, and now a whole lot of hands went up here in the black and white jacket. The development of the internet. So the internet, and we can look at the internet in the context, for instance, of transportation and information development. Because transportation and information development, all of that's about increasing trade, allowing for specialization in trade and allowing the gains from trade. And so that's one way that we can look at the development of the internet. And then here in the white. Of the financial industry? Okay. Deregulation of the financial industry. I'm just going to shorthand that. So we'll look at the financial institutions over the span of history, and then I've got a whole day in the third part of the course where I get to talk about AIG and subprime mortgages and all of that kind of stuff, and so that we can see it not just as a current events topic, but link it in with the patterns of history that we will have looked at by the time we get to the third part of the course. So hopefully you all came up with those examples or other examples, and what we're trying to do in this course is to give you analogical reasoning tools to gain insight into all sorts of contemporary events for today. All right, questions? Studying economic history. One of the things that's important is this is not a set of facts to be memorized. A lot of people, when they come into a history class, they think, oh God, I'm going to have to memorize all these names and dates and places. There are certain names and dates and places that you kind of need to know. You need to know, that the Civil War took place in the 1860s. You need to know that the Great Depression of the 1930s took place in the 1930s, yeah. And the geography, of course, is going to be important. But more, what we're doing here, and the reason this is an upper division economics class, is we're looking at how we use economics to understand historical events, and also how economists use history to revise the economic theory that we have. So we're looking for that synergy between economics and history. So using so I guess it's both the deductive and the inductive reasoning. So using the economic models that we have to make sense of historical events, and then also using historical events to question the assumptions of our economic models. That's what we're going to be doing. So there's a lot, as you'll see momentarily, a lot of economics that takes place in this class. Oh, I forgot to check my symbols. That's supposed to be a not equal to. Economics, economists and historians, we come at things differently. For those of you who come at this as an historian, there are things that I will do that will frustrate you, and I think this might capture part of it. For economists, we're concerned with what happens on average. We're really concerned about what describes what's happening to the trends, why on average are more people. For instance, I read an article online this morning that said the high school graduation rates have been going up over the last 3 or 4 years. That's the kind of issue that economists would care about, that on average high school graduation rates are going up. And we would look at explanations for why on average high school graduation rates are going up. We're not going to look and see why does Harry drop out of college or high school and Mary stays in high school. So we're not interested in the particulars, we're interested in the overall trend or what happens on average in some sort of situation. Historians tend to be more concerned with the specific case and would be more concerned with understanding the determinants of Harry's behavior and the determinants of Mary's behavior. So economists are quite happy with an explanation that says that high school graduation rates are going up because job opportunities dried up with the downturn. The opportunity cost of staying in school went down, and therefore more people stayed in school and finished high school. That on average explanation, you may not be able to find any one particular person who will say, the reason I stayed in school was because I went out and I looked for a job and I couldn't find a job. But yet we could do a study and we could look at job opportunities available, say, by county and graduation rates by county, and we would find a story that fit pretty well. That the more job opportunities there were in each county, the lower the high school graduation rate, all else constant. The fewer job opportunities in that county, the higher the high school graduation rate, all else constant. So here we're looking at economic history, but we're doing it as economists, and so we will be looking at what explains on average what's going on. To do this, we use economic models. Economic models, as those of you who've had classes from me before know, economic models are characterized by three things. They're characterized by, first, a question, second, by simplifications and abstractions, and third, by assumptions about economic behavior. When we say economic model, it's the economist's fancy way of saying a story. That we have stories that we use to answer questions. What determines the price of a, I don't know, let's see, 6-ounce cup of chocolate-flavored frozen yogurt? I went into Yogurt Park over break. I did not order chocolate, but I did go up and I said, may I have a 6-ounce cup of, I started to say chocolate, but I like the raspberry. 6-ounce cup of raspberry-flavored frozen yogurt, please. Anyway, so the economic model is the answer to a question. It's characterized by three things. A question. Change the question, you've got a different story. That is to say, you've got a different model. It's characterized, secondly, by simplifications and assumptions. We live in a crazy, complex, amazing world. We're never going to get anywhere in answering our questions if we pay attention to all of the detail in our world. And so we have to simplify that world down. Part of the task of economics is figuring out which simplifications allow us to answer the question validly and which simplifications give us the wrong answer to the question. So the second piece of a model is what simplifications do we make, how do we make our world easier to understand, stripping away the detail that's not relevant for our question. The third piece is assumptions about economic behavior. How do people behave? So we assume that people respond to incentives. We assume that businesses are profit maximizers, that people are utility maximizers. We assume that when prices go up, quantity demand goes down. We assume that when income goes up, demand for normal goods goes up and demand for inferior goods goes down. All those are assumptions about economic behavior. If we change the assumptions, change any assumption about behavior, it changes the story. That is, it changes the model, it changes the answer to the question. So economic models are characterized by these three things: questions, simplifications, and assumptions. Change any one of those three things and we have a different economic model. We express these economic models in three ways: with words, lots of talking, with graphs, so we draw a lot of graphs, always in 2 dimensions, because economists can't draw in 3 dimensions. Most of us. A few can, I can't. Or in equations. I take it back. You will see equations in this class. We're going to walk you through them. Okay, so the equations that you see, we're going to help you through. One of the things that you'll learn in this class is how to interpret regression results, because a lot of the work that's done by economic historians is done using data that we plug into equations to see what are the statistically significant relationships between variables. That's a sentence that if you don't know right now what it means, you will know what it means in about 3 weeks. So we're going to teach you enough econometrics to allow you to read the articles that are in the reader, and the articles in the reader, most of them have empirical, that is to say, regression results in them. So you'll see how it is that we express our economics, particularly with words, with equations, with empirical evidence. Can you put the cell phone away, please? Thank you. Okay, 2 terms that we use a lot. One is cliometrics. Cliometrics means the explicit use of economic theory and statistical reasoning in studying history. There was a time when cliometrics was new, when the use of theory, the explicit use of theory and the use of statistical reasoning running regressions was something that the young economic historians did, and the older economic historians couldn't follow it and didn't understand why we were doing it. There's a seat way over on the side if you want to sit there. But now, almost all the economic history that we do is of the cliometric type. So there is explicit economic reasoning that we bring to bear on the stuff that we're doing. There is statistical reasoning that is using regressions to understand economic history. So all of the things you'll read for this course are in that vein of cliometric history. Sometimes there are people who are outside of economics who use the term cliometrics, perhaps without fully knowing what it means, but they'll use it in a disparaging way. I have to admit, I'm never quite sure what they're disparaging, because maybe it means I'm just too steeped in this. But from my perspective, using what we know about economics and how things go together and how one thing influences another to understand historical events, and using historical events to help us clarify which of our assumptions in our models are correct and which ones, frankly, are incorrect, that to me is what it's all about, and that is cliometrics. It is different, as I said, from the historian's task of describing the fine and understanding and analyzing the fine detail of life. The other concept that we use a lot is the concept of the counterfactual. Now, in macro or in principles courses, we talk about the counterfactual in terms of economic policy. Here we use it not only in terms of policy, but more generally. So it's a style of argument in which we assume alternative historical facts in order to demonstrate the importance of the actual facts. So this slide, which doesn't come in right because I didn't do my animations right, which some of you have seen, counterfactual is how we evaluate any policy or event. Counterfactual means that to evaluate